Most people walk into a grocery store, grab a little plastic pack of herbs, use a few sprigs, and treat the rest like a countdown to compost. That's the mistake. Not buying herbs, misreading them. Because a surprising number of those little bunches are not dead ingredients at all. They are living starts, cuttings, divisions, bulbs, roots, and growing points that can feed you far longer than one recipe ever will. And once you see that, the whole herb shelf changes. You stop shopping like a consumer and start looking like a grower. That matters more than people think. Because the money is one thing, sure. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. But the bigger loss is habit. It's the habit of assuming you have to keep buying what you could have kept alive. It's the habit of cutting off the useful part, throwing away the living part, and calling that normal. A lot of people say they wish they were more self-reliant, more connected to what they grow, more practical in the kitchen. This is one of the easiest places to begin. Not with a tractor, not with acres, with the herb packet sitting beside your onions and potatoes. Now, there is one correction we need to make right away. Regrowing grocery store herbs is not magic, and it is not the same for every plant. That's where people get discouraged. They try one random online trick, stick everything in a glass of water, wait 3 days, and when it turns slimy, they decide the whole idea was nonsense. But the problem wasn't the idea. The problem was the rule. There is no single rule. Some herbs regrow from roots, some from stem cuttings, some from the crown, some from bulb bases, and some will give you a little flush of new life, but won't become the long-term plant you hoped for unless you move them into soil and treat them like something alive, not like a garnish with a second chance. So the better principle is simple. Before you use a grocery store herb, ask one question. What part of this plant is still capable of making more plant? If you learn to see that, you'll waste less, spend less, and start building a kitchen habit that feels a whole lot older and wiser than the throwaway way most people have been taught to live. Let's start with the easiest category, because success early changes everything. Green onions are probably the cleanest example of the whole principle. Most people use the green tops, toss the white bases with the roots attached, and never think twice. But that rooted base is still a working little engine. Leave an inch or two above the root end, stand it in a shallow glass with just enough water to cover the roots, and put it near light. You'll often see fresh green growth start in a day or two. It feels almost unfair the first time you do it. Like you found money in an old coat pocket. Now, water is fine for waking it back up, but if you want more than a quick repeat, pot it into soil. That is the step people skip. Water can restart the plant, soil can sustain it, and once you learn that difference, green onions stop being scraps forever. Leeks can work much the same way, though they ask for a little more patience. If you buy whole leeks with the root plate intact, don't throw that bottom section away. Keep the base, give it water, then move it into soil once new growth shows. You're not rebuilding a giant market leek overnight, but you are getting fresh green leaf growth and sometimes a respectable second life from something many people treat as pure waste. That is the pattern to watch for again and again in this video. Not every herb or aromatic comes back in exactly the same shape you bought it. Sometimes the return is smaller, leafier, younger, or slower. But usable is usable, and if it grows in your care instead of dying in the trash, that's already a win. Lemongrass is another one that makes people do a double take. If the stalks are fresh and the base is intact, you can stand them in water and wait for roots to form from the bottom. Once that happens, move them into a pot with warmth and steady moisture. What surprises people is how quickly an expensive little bundle can turn into a handsome clump if you stop seeing it as a one-time flavor stick. The smell alone is worth it when you brush past the leaves. Sharp, clean, almost lemon peel with green sugarcane behind it. And once you have it growing, you don't feel the same about paying grocery prices for 2 tired stalks wrapped in plastic. Now let's shift to herbs that regrow from cuttings, because this is where the misunderstanding gets bigger. A lot of people assume if an herb doesn't already have roots on it, it's finished. Not true. Many soft-stem herbs are perfectly capable of making roots from the nodes along the stem, if the stems are fresh enough and if you prepare them right. Basil is the classic example. And it's also where a lot of people go wrong because they start with the oldest, toughest stems in the pack. What you want are healthy green stems, not limp, blackened ones. Snip just below a leaf node, remove the lower leaves, and set the stem in clean water with the node submerged and the leaves above the waterline. Change the water every day or two. In a week or so, sometimes less, you'll usually see roots beginning. Then you plant it. Not after it rots. Not after the roots turn into a tangled water beard. Plant it when it has enough to take hold. Basil wants to live fast. Give it warmth, sun, and regular pinching once it settles, and one grocery bunch can become the mother of many meals. Mint is even more willing, which is fitting because anybody who has ever planted mint in open ground knows willingness is not exactly its problem. Fresh grocery mint cuttings can root in water with very little fuss. Again, strip the lower leaves, keep the nodes submerged, and move it into soil after roots form. Once established, mint barely asks your permission. In fact, the better question with mint is not can you regrow it, but where are you going to contain it so it doesn't start acting like it owns the place. Pot culture suits it just fine. Kitchen windowsill, porch, side table near the door. And suddenly that one plastic clamshell is tea, garnish, summer drinks, and armfuls of fragrance every time you brush against it. Oregano behaves in a quieter but equally useful way. Fresh stems can root from cuttings, though they may be slower than mint or basil. Use tender growth, not woody ends. Give it light, don't drown it, and once it moves into soil, be careful not to pamper it to death. Oregano often does better with a little restraint. Good drainage, enough sun, and a touch of neglect can take it farther than constant fussing. That's another correction people need. Regrowing is not the finish line. Establishing the plant is. Some herbs don't want to live in a jar forever. They want the conditions that match their nature. Marjoram fits close to oregano, which makes sense because the plants are related and the flavor lives in the same neighborhood, only softer and sweeter. Grocery stems can root from cuttings if they're fresh. The trick is not to let them sit too long in the refrigerator before you try. Once herbs have been chilled, dried, and handled half to death, your odds go down. So if you mean to regrow them, start early. Treat store herbs like living material the day you bring them home, not like leftovers after the cooking is done. Thyme can be a little trickier, but it is still well worth trying. The stems are finer, woodier, and slower to throw roots, especially if the bunch is older. But tender tip cuttings can take, especially in moist potting mix, or water followed quickly by soil. The key with thyme is patience and drainage. It doesn't like soggy feet, and people kill it with kindness all the time. If you get a few stems to root, that's enough. A little thyme plant can become a very steady companion, giving you small harvests again and again without asking for much beyond sun and a pot that can breathe. Sage is another herb that corrects the lazy assumption that grocery bunches are dead on arrival. Soft new sage cuttings can root, especially before the stems turn fully woody. It may take longer than basil or mint, and not every stem will make it. But if you choose healthy growth, you can absolutely turn a purchased bundle into a plant. And sage is one of those herbs that changes the mood of a place. Silvery leaves, soft texture, that dry, savory smell when you rub it between your fingers. It feels like a plant with memory in it. A useful one, too. Rosemary deserves honesty here. Yes, grocery rosemary can regrow from cuttings, but it is often sold in a tougher, drier state than softer herbs, and older woody stems are harder to root. Your best chance is with fresher green tips, stripped on the lower half and placed in a very free-draining mix or sometimes water to start. Warmth helps, so does patience. If rosemary roots for you, it's incredibly satisfying, because it turns one expensive little purchase into a plant that can last for years if protected from the worst cold. But this is also where viewers should hear the truth. Not every attempt works, and that does not mean you failed. Sometimes the store simply sold you stems that had already spent too long out of the ground. Knowing that keeps disappointment from turning into defeat. Tarragon, when you can find it fresh, may also root from cuttings, especially French tarragon sold as stems rather than potted plants. It's a finer, more delicate herb to handle, but worth trying if you love the flavor. Again, freshness matters. So does speed. There's a pattern here because the principle is real. The longer a cut stem lives as an ingredient, the less energy it has left to reinvent itself as a plant. Now we come to herbs that often arrive as whole potted plants in the grocery store. And this is another place people misunderstand what they're looking at. They think those pots are meant to sit in the kitchen exactly as they are until they fade out. Usually not. Those grocery pots are often crowded on purpose. They were grown fast for quick sale, with many seedlings packed together to look lush and generous. That fullness is attractive, but it can also be the reason the plant crashes after a week. Too many roots competing, too little soil, too little airflow. So the correction is this: when you buy a potted herb, you are not buying a decorative finished product. You are buying several baby plants in temporary housing. Cilantro is a good example. Grocery cilantro pots often bolt fast or droop because they're crowded and stressed. But if you divide the clump gently and give the seedlings more space, you can often keep some of them going much longer than people expect. Will cilantro always become a forever windowsill hero? No. It is naturally quick, sensitive to heat, and eager to flower. But if you stop treating the pot like a permanent arrangement and start treating it like a tray of starts, you get a fairer result. Parsley works even better for many people. Flat leaf or curly, those grocery pots can often be divided and transplanted into deeper containers or a garden bed. Parsley likes more root room than the store gives it. Once established, it can sit there quietly, throwing usable stems for a long time. Not dramatic, just reliable, which honestly is one of the finest qualities a plant can have. Chives are another easy reclaim. If you buy a potted chive plant, or even bunches with enough base to work with, you can divide and replant them. Chives respond beautifully to being cut and coming back. They almost seem to understand the assignment. Give them sun, enough moisture, and a little room, and they repay you in green blades over and over. Snip, eat, repeat. There's something deeply satisfying about that rhythm. Now let's talk about the herbs people forget are really more like aromatic roots, crowns, or bulb relatives in the kitchen. Coriander root won't help you much from a trimmed bunch, but celery with the base attached, while not an herb in the strict sense, teaches the principle beautifully. So does fennel with a sound base. But staying with the spirit of this title, one of the best grocery store regrowers in the herb world is garlic. A clove is not just seasoning. It is a plant waiting for conditions. Set a clove root side down in soil and you can grow garlic greens fairly quickly, and with enough time and proper conditions, potentially bulbs. Most people at least start with the greens. They are useful, mild, and a reminder that a pantry staple may still be biologically active, still ready to become more. Ginger belongs in that same conversation. Not an herb in the tender leafy sense, but absolutely one of the great grocery regrowers. A plump rhizome with visible buds can be planted shallow in warm soil, and from there it begins its slow, quiet work. Ginger teaches patience better than almost anything on this list. It will not perform for your impatience, but give it warmth, moisture, and time, and it returns not just leaves but future harvest beneath the soil. Turmeric, if you find it fresh, behaves similarly. Now, because this title says 15, let's make sure we name the full circle plainly. Green onions, leeks, lemongrass, basil, mint, oregano, marjoram, thyme, sage, rosemary, tarragon, cilantro, parsley, chives, and garlic are all realistic grocery store regrowers, with ginger as an honorable extra if your store carries it. But here is the more important thing than the list itself. You do not need to memorize all 15 at once. You need to understand why they work. Roots attached? You likely have a head start. Fresh stem with living nodes? You may have a cutting. Crowded potted herb? You may really have several young plants begging to be separated. Bulb, clove, rhizome, crown, base? You may be holding stored energy waiting for the right conditions. There are also a few practical selection rules that will save you frustration before you even leave the store. If you are buying bunch herbs for regrowing, freshness matters more than size. A huge bundle that has been sitting under cold mist and bright lights for days may look abundant, but a smaller bunch with firmer stems and cleaner leaf color often has more life left in it. Avoid blackened stem ends, mushy bases, yellow leaves, or anything with that tired, translucent look herbs get when they've been chilled too hard. With rooted things like green onions or leeks, check the base. You want actual roots, not a shaved-off bottom. With potted herbs, look past the full top growth and peek at the soil. If it is bone dry, crusted, or already smells sour, you're buying stress. And once you get the herbs home, the first 24 hours matter. People often buy herbs, toss them in the refrigerator, and only later decide to try regrowing them after half the bunch has already softened. That stacks the odds against you. If regrowth is the goal, separate your planting material first. Save the best stems, the healthiest bases, the firmest cloves, the strongest crowns. Use the weaker parts for dinner, and give the best biological material the best chance. That sounds obvious when said out loud, but many failures begin because people try to regrow whatever is left after the useful-looking parts are gone. Water matters too, but not in the way most people assume. More is not kinder. For rooted bases like green onions, a shallow amount of clean water is enough. You are wetting roots, not drowning the whole plant. For cuttings, keep the nodes wet and the leaves dry. Change the water before it goes cloudy. Once roots appear, do not leave the plant suspended there forever just because it looks dramatic in a jar. Water roots and soil roots are not quite the same working system. A cutting that seemed happy in water can sulk hard when moved late. Small roots, then potting mix. That timing solves a lot. The same goes for light. Grocery herbs are often raised under bright commercial conditions, then shoved into darker kitchens where people expect them to thrive on sentiment. They need real light. A sunny window helps. Outdoors, once temperatures suit the plant, helps even more. Basil and lemongrass want warmth. Parsley and chives forgive more cool weather. Mint adapts easily. Rosemary wants brightness and drainage, not a dark, damp corner behind the sink. When people say, "I tried this and it never worked," sometimes the cutting was fine, the room was wrong. And here is one more useful correction. Success does not always mean recreating the exact supermarket bundle. A regrown green onion may be thinner. A cilantro transplant may flower sooner than you hoped. A rooted basil cutting may start small before it bushes out. That is not failure. That is a living plant adjusting to the conditions you gave it. If you judge every regrown herb by the unrealistic standard of instant full replacement, you'll miss the real reward, which is continuity. Fresh growth, usable harvest. A plant that keeps going because you understood what it needed. That way of seeing changes your behavior in small but powerful ways. You stop chopping right down to the base without thinking. You stop letting a whole packet yellow in the fridge because you assume the only options are use it or lose it. You start saving the healthiest stems. You start looking for roots when you shop. You start choosing the bunch with life in it, not just the bunch with the prettiest band around it. And there's another correction worth making. Regrowing herbs is not only about thrift, though thrift is part of the pleasure. It's also about freshness that stores can't really sell you. The basil you cut 30 seconds before it hits the pot tastes different. The chives snipped over eggs smell brighter. The mint at the door is fuller and colder and more alive than the limp sprig you forgot in the crisper. When you regrow even a few of these, you don't just save scraps. You upgrade daily life in quiet ways. You also build judgment. And that may be the most valuable thing here. Because this kind of practice teaches you to notice nodes, roots, crowns, new shoots, stress, recovery, drainage, and timing. In other words, it teaches you how plants behave. And once you learn that with herbs, you stop being intimidated by every other small growing project. A pot of parsley becomes confidence. A rooted basil cutting becomes proof. A row of regrown green onions on the sill becomes evidence that you are capable of more than passive consumption. Now, let's be fair about the limits. Sometimes store herbs are sprayed, chilled too hard, bruised, or harvested old. Sometimes they rot before they root. Sometimes they root and then collapse when moved to soil because the transition was too abrupt. Sometimes you simply don't have enough light in the dead of winter for real success indoors. None of that cancels the principle. It just means living things are living things. Farmers know this. Gardeners know this. Not every seed sprouts. Not every cutting takes. But enough do that the skill becomes worthwhile. So if you try this, don't start with all 15, start with 3. Green onions for the easy win. Basil or mint for the cutting lesson. Parsley or chives for the potted herb lesson. Learn the pattern from those, and the rest will make more sense in your hands than they ever will in a clever little chart. If you want one more easy habit, label the pot with the day you started it. That tiny note keeps you from fussing too soon, forgetting what you planted, or declaring failure before roots have had time to form. Half of practical growing is memory. The label turns an experiment into a real observation, and observations teach more than guesswork ever will. And once you get it, you may find the real shift is not in your herb garden at all. It's in the way you look at ordinary things. You begin asking better questions. Is this finished, or is it unfinished? Is this waste, or is this potential? Am I buying a product, or bringing home a living piece of a plant that still knows what to do if I stop getting in its way? That is a very old kind of intelligence. The kind that notices before it buys. The kind that saves before it throws away. The kind that understands that self-reliance usually does not arrive as one grand dramatic transformation. It arrives in smaller recognitions. A rooted onion base in a jelly jar. A basil stem pushing out white threads. A clump of chives returning after you thought you'd cut it down to nothing. And maybe that's why this matters to people more than the price of herbs. Because each time you regrow one, even in a little kitchen window, you correct a modern reflex that says everything useful comes sealed, purchased, and pre-decided for you. It doesn't. Sometimes usefulness is waiting in the part most people toss. So I'm curious which one surprised you most, and which ones actually work best where you live. Are you on Team Green Onion because it's practically impossible to mess up? Or do you swear by basil, mint, or parsley once they settle into soil? And if there's a grocery store herb your family always reused without making a big deal out of it, that's worth hearing too, because a lot of the best knowledge still travels hand to hand that way. Once you start seeing grocery herbs as living material instead of disposable flavor, it becomes hard to unsee. And that is a good thing. Because from there, you won't just cook differently. You'll notice differently. And people who notice differently usually end up living differently too.